since you've just been named.
Thanks, Eldred. I think there's been a lot of same stuff, but I think the more interesting is that there've been some really useful discussions and some interesting discussions. And I just want to pull out sort of two or three of what Gun-Free South Africa sees as emerging consensus. I think for us, as gun control advocates, a very significant shift has happened in this meeting, and that is a recognition, and it's a global principle and norm that was negotiated at the UN about 10 years ago. And it's been reiterated by gun owners several times in this forum, is that you license the person and you register the gun. Our current Act does that, but there's often been quite a lot of resistance to that. So it's about deeming someone fit and proper, but you recognize that the weapon itself needs to be registered. And I think that's a really important step forward. I think to add that I think there would appear to be differences around this. It's people who commit crime, it's not the guns, which is precisely why you need a regulatory regime, because you need to regulate who owns what weapon for which purpose. And again, that's a sort of basic principle underpinning most gun laws across the world. So in a way, it's a plea to move beyond the kind of it's people who kill, not guns, because I think the law recognizes that, and that's why you need regulation. You need to regulate people and ownership of weapons. I think the second emerging consensus, and I think in response to the Tshwane police officer, is I think there's a good consensus around the need for a national firearms amnesty. I think there's emerging consensus around no questions asked. We recognize that that's a big step forward for this country, but it means we've got something very concrete on the table, and we can begin to kind of hammer out some of the details of what that would look like for this context. And I think there are some useful international examples. And I think the third consensus is the need for accurate record keeping, and not just good data and accurate data, but the sharing of data in the public domain, so that we can develop an analysis of where are the problems. And it's not about blaming. So if the Committee of Inquiry into Corrupt Practices of Firearm Dealers and Firearm Institutions, which was set up in 2013 by then Minister Nathi Mthethwa, if it's finding that a major problem of leakage and diversion and corruption is CFR officers, we need to know that, not because we want to say CFR officers are bad, because we want to say if that's where the problem lies, what are the solutions? What do we have to be doing something different in order to stop the leakage? And the fact that our question was deliberately not answered this morning is a concern, because it's what is in that report that we cannot see, that we may not know about. That report has been around for the last year. So as much as there's an emerging consensus around the need for accurate data and information and an analysis to help us develop effective and relevant interventions, our concern is, one, the lack of transparency around that Committee of Inquiry report. The other is the huge discrepancies between loss and theft that we have. Finally, and this, I think, is an area where there hasn't been sufficient voice, partly because of who's in the room. But when we think of gun control, we need to think beyond firearm owners and their interests, and they are end users of the Act. That the Act is geared towards controlling and regulating the gun-owning fraternity. And the gentleman from the SA Hunt has mentioned the cost in terms of positive terms for our country. We need to balance that with the cost of gun death and injury. It is $6 billion annually. That is what it costs us annually. Lives lost, and rehabilitation, medical emergency services, etc. And we need to be also keeping that in mind about the enormous cost of gun violence to our society, and that's, I think, largely been absent in this discussion. And then I guess finally, just once again, as I said yesterday in when I was up on the panel, is to really thank the Portfolio Committee on Police and the Civilian Secretariat for bringing us together, for being bold enough to put people with very different views and perspectives on this in the same room. And Eldred, because I've got the last word, you have been an extraordinary facilitator. Thank you for making it a safe space, and for encouraging us to speak out, but also reminding us about being respectful and what we're about here. And essentially, we're about saving lives.